Good afternoon, everybody, and great to have you all here. Despite the fact that there was a fully packed morning, of course the subject could be extended for a whole day if you wanted, but we know we are also kind of fully aware of people's precious agenda and time, so we try to kind of do it all in one morning. Before I give the floor to our president, I thought it would be useful, as we're having you here together, to kick off with some updates on how the market is evolving when it comes to commercial vehicles in Europe. And when you look back, because we are now early 2016, so you can look back at 2015 and see what happened. And the good news is that the market showed really a consistent uplift of plus 12.4% versus the year before, which means that the market has been going up now for a third year in a row, exceeding 2 million commercial vehicles registered. That is encouraging. For 2016, we anticipate a much more modest sales increase for commercial vehicles, which we expect to grow more. That's the good news, but probably at a more moderate pace. Yeah? When you look at production in 2015, and you look at the production across not only the EU, but if we include Turkey and some of the CIS countries, we see again a substantial growth of production of commercial vehicles, plus 9.2%, reaching about 3.2 million units which were produced, mainly driven by an increase in domestic demand for commercial vehicles within the EU. And then if you look at trade, because you already see, sharing these figures, we are producing more than we are selling. We, a little bit like passenger cars, not that strongly as in passenger cars, but you see a big contribution to export. The use trade balance for commercial vehicles and buses remained positive over the first 10 months of 2015. We don't have the full picture yet. But based on what we know today, so the first 10 months of 2015, we can already say we delivered a trade surplus of 3.4 billion euros. So again, shows in fact, despite all the challenges the industry is facing, we are on a growth path, we are on a recovery path. Again, we expect more to come, but at least it's going in the right direction. And I thought this information was at least useful to share before I now hand over to our president, Martin Lundstedt.
Thank you, Eric. And also from my side, I will be pretty brief on the statement, since I know that you have got the press material. First of all, thank you for coming, and also thank you for coming to this morning's event. For us in the commercial vehicle section of ACEA, it has been a very interesting work. We are passionate about what we have done over a couple of years now, with a very firm track of what we want to achieve when it comes to the long-term strategy of environmental action, and at the same time driving this industry to be sustainable for real. And that is economically, environmentally, socially, ethically, and safety viable in the combination, actually. And then we are doing all the good things that we want to do, and at the same time also driving prosperity for society. And as you know, the main event of today has been actually to issuing its position paper of reducing CO2 from heavy-duty vehicles. We are happy to share that with you, of course. Our industry has a strong track record. We should be recognized that we are actually the world-leading part of our industry when it also looks to the driving of the continents and the legislations. Firstly, regarding pollutant emission for today's Euro 6 trucks, I think it's important to say, compared to Euro 5, which in itself was an achievement when it comes to nitrogen oxides and particulate matters. I mean, NOx emissions have been reduced by a further 80%, in particular mass emissions, including ultrafine particles, have fallen by a further 67%. And that is I mean, from already very straight emission levels actually when it comes to the, as I normally say, the neighboring emissions of NOx and particulate matters. Also using portable emission measurement system, random checks of vehicles, in addition to the onboard diagnostics that we have on the heavy vehicle for Euro 6, have been carried out under the supervision of the authorities to verify and demonstrate that tailpipe emissions comply with the legal requirements under real driving conditions. Secondly, and this is really for the pollutant emissions, so to speak, secondly regarding CO2 emissions, I think today's main topic of the game, per ton transported, technological innovation has resulted in a fuel consumption of around 1 liter of diesel per 100 ton kilometers, delivering a significant reduction of CO2 emissions. And we are on track with our Vision 2020 installed in 2008. With this vision, we committed to achieve around 1.3% annual CO2 reduction rate from new vehicles. And however, as we've said, not only do new vehicles represent an option, but also the today's fleet, since I mean the new vehicles delivered into the market is pretty small in relation to the full fleet. But there is, as a consequence, much more than the vehicle alone that determines CO2 emissions. Trailer designs, that was discussed during this morning, alternative fuels, transport operations, and infrastructure also play a decisive role, and those were topics that we were covering actually. This is why we are calling for an integrated approach for a far greater impact on overall CO2 emissions from road freight transport. An independent Transport Mobility Leuven study we launched at the Hanover Motor Show last year and shows that the integrated approach can move more than double the annual CO2 reduction rate up to 3.5%. So what is new today then? The results of this study have just been validated by a consortium of 16 road transport stakeholders who have been working with since 2014, and those are typically stakeholders that are representing other parts of the value chain, as earlier explained. You can also see the breakdown of the validated study results in your press packs, together with a list of the stakeholders who endorse them. So I will now zoom to just a few specific measures that form part of the integrated approach. Revising maximum weights and dimension has a great potential. High-capacity vehicles such as European modular system and other highly efficient solutions increasing the loading length of trailers and semi-trailers have proven their added value in several European Union countries over the past years. In Scandinavia, where I come from, we are running trucks that are 20.25 meters long, 6.5 meters more than in the rest of Europe. As a consequence, we were able to replace 3 trucks with 2. This has resulted in less congestion, less road wear, and a reduction in fuel consumption of 15 to 25%, and thereby also a reduction of CO2 without any related safety issues. Both heavy-duty vehicle manufacturers and transport companies actively contribute to improving the behavior of drivers through eco-driving, training and driver assistance systems more and more into place in new vehicles, but also in some cases retrofitted. Driver training is one of the most prominent candidates for a quick win on CO2 reductions. At the minimum cost, the potential reduction is as high as 7%, in some specific cases even more. The capacity, condition and efficient use of road infrastructure can potentially reduce CO2 emissions by around 4% by 2020 compared to 2014. Improving infrastructure is thus crucial. This goes from proper maintenance of roads with low rolling resistance pavement to further improvements to the infrastructure. Other measures with significant potential include the rollout of smart and connected transport networks using intelligent transport systems, all of that introduced step by step as we speak. To conclude, we believe that the integrated approach is the right way forward and the only way to reduce the CO2 emissions of the transport industry in Europe on a large scale. And we are very glad and happy that so many different stakeholders have joined us on this journey. So with that, I would like actually to open up for questions. So please.
Just before we start the Q&A session, just a reminder that Mr. Lundstedt is representing the commercial vehicle industry in Europe today. So he will take companies on the industry-wide level, but not company-specific ones. So with that, please just say your name and media outlet. Go ahead.
Okay, I start. I'm Werner Walsen, I'm writing for DVZ, Deutsche Verkehrszeitung in Germany. I would like to come back to what we've seen in the morning, and I have two questions. First, I was very surprised that after a long time of having the debate on aerodynamics, this really wasn't mentioned today. Where has it gone? Is it no further concept in your vision? And the second point is, and that is a question which was raised during the morning sessions, why is it impossible for the European industry to come to standards like their normal CO2 emission standards, like they're obviously normal in other parts of the world?
If I take we take it in order. If we start with aerodynamics, of course it is, it will continue to be a very important part. What we see is that aerodynamics will continue to play a role in the actual design of the tractor head. It will have a huge impact when it comes to the truck trailer design altogether. We have already stated in many cases that if we can use a little bit of different parts of the starter, but even more at the end, it will play an important role also. We are doing some testing in markets that is accepting that. Obviously, and also, I mean, the platooning case in itself, this is about aerodynamics. I mean, aerodynamics will continue to play an important role. It already did in the first step, so to speak, in our Vision 2020. Now we're adding up more. Of course, some parts of this is about aerodynamics, and some parts is about the integrated approach with other actors. One should not forget that a big part of the first step, of course, is related to our own abilities, but then it's even more about the cooperation. So still aerodynamics an important role. Secondly, on the CO2 emissions, again, what we have said is that for the pollutant emissions, we think it's absolutely the right way to go or that we have done with legislations, because you have not any natural market forces into NOx or particulate matters. When it comes to the CO2, what we say is that by working with the Commission, and we were glad to hear also the Commission, so to speak, elaborating around that, or elaborating on that this morning, that they have listened to the argument that having a visible simulation tools that were actually on track, first of all, and secondly, that being able to have a legislation that will not actually dilute the opportunity of tailor-making the trucks and the applications is a much bigger risk actually than to have the legislation itself. Then, however, of course, we understand that if this is not given the reasonable effect, then we should have a dialogue on it. But we are convinced by the integrated approach that this is the right way to go. Increase transparency, include the variety of our industry that I think is not well understood yet, and of course that responsibility is on us also to explain that. Again, and I think Pierre stated that very well also in the morning, when it comes to Japan, almost half of the market is actually to two of the manufacturers that is in that space, so to speak, or at least 1/3, a little bit more. With the technology coming out from Europe, mainly on the powertrains. In US, it's 2/3 of the market that is owned by the European OEMs. So I mean, that discussion is just not correct, because the difference we see in the development there is what was the starting point, first of all, and secondly, what is the current level when it comes to the legislations that we have for that specific market. Here, of course, we are, as an industry, leveraging from a global technology. I mean, it speaks for itself. We are not developing different technologies for the different markets as long as we can. What we should do in that case is to continue to work on the harmonization of the emission rules, because there we are spending a lot of money when it comes to the Japanese, the European and the American legislations, with more or less the same pollutant functionality, but just to make the certification of those is costing a lot of money for each we have to know a specific effect.
Has anyone from the trailer industry validated the TML study? Because there were some tweets during the conference, we couldn't see them, pointing to the fact that the trailer industry was a bit absent from this morning's debate.
Now, I can confirm that there is also a sector organization of trailer manufacturers. By the way, in this exercise, we discovered a lot of things. We didn't know that there are so many sector organizations when it comes to transport. But indeed, also trailer manufacturers have their own association. They were part of the exercise and they validated also the figures. Yes. They in fact have embraced this exercise enormously, because often they are overlooked. People kind of confuse sometimes the trailers with us and think it's all one basket. So the fact that we were able also to bring them to the table and listen to them, get their perspective, and make sure that the figures which were produced by Transport Mobility Leuven were correct, helped as well. So yes, they are part of the consortium and will continue working with them as well.
And one can say also a lot of the national initiatives on this is about the complete vehicle, the super truck initiative, and other different factors, and not a lot of also material research from traders. So absolutely, aerodynamics, as we will go into, really the play between the truck and the trailer is absolutely one of the still biggest wins. Not only an optimized combination, but still keep it optimized over the life cycle. You know how many times you have seen air deflectors not standing in the right position, for example. So, continue to also educate that you should continue to line axles over the life cycle. We are talking about 4 or 5 percentage points. It's obvious to many of you, but.
Question back here.
First, are there any lessons to be drawn from the forces testing of trucks from the problems? And the second question is just difficult to repeat the production figures for the zero adjustments.
When it comes to the production figures, and we can share it also afterwards if that's of interest, but we talked about 3.2 million units over the first 10 months of 2015. So we don't have complete figures yet for all of 2015. So it's only the first 10 months of 2015, which is already an increase of 9.2% versus last year. 9.2%. 9.2%.
There's a market and economic report in the press pack.
Okay.
When it comes to the first question, of course, just to be clear, rules are rules. That's the first. And secondly, when it comes to the truck industry, as I have said, for the Euro 6 now, the highest level, we have the onboard diagnostics. We have torque reduction if you are not complying. There is, of course, a certification process for that already in place. There are portable also measurements to do in order to make sure that also for, so to speak, Euro 5, etc. So I think that is great. And of course, in the long run, it's about, showing on the pollutant side, but also on the CO2 side, or whatever. It could be safety, it could be noise, or whatever parameter that is part of this that we are complying. One, but even more that we are an active part of the development to make a more prosperous society, basically. That is how you build trust.
If I may add to that, when it comes to real driving emissions testing, commercial vehicles were ahead of passenger cars. So, but again, that is the regulation followed faster than for passenger cars, because the whole emissions debate, which we are currently facing in the automotive industry, following indeed the Volkswagen scandal, we need to first of all differentiate what happened to Volkswagen and what is happening in the rest of the industry. So we want to be very clear. I mean, nobody else is using these defeat devices, and I know in Volkswagen investigations are taking place, and okay, there's follow-up which is happening as we speak, both in US, in Europe, and in other places. The issue we, however, were facing in passenger cars is that the industry was asked to run emission testing following, you could say, outdated protocols, outdated test methods. Testing methods which were adopted in the 90s and were based on state-of-the-art of the technology in the 80s. So it is as if manufacturers of passenger cars were asked in 2016 to test cars as if the car was manufactured in 1980, disregarding all the new technology which has been added in the meantime, which also contributes to emissions. I mean, like heated windows, air conditioning, which were at that time an option but not standard, have now become standard, but they contribute to CO2 emissions. The testing protocol didn't foresee that, and so none of the OEMs were asked to take into account, you know, this, you could say, more polluting or emitting technology when doing the emission testing. What we now have, and this is of course a passenger car discussion, but what we now have, and I think the Parliament has agreed with this now, a compromise proposal which was reached between the Commission and Member States on how testing needs to be done. Clearly, the testing protocol has been updated big time to reduce any possible discrepancies between testing and, you know, real driving emissions results, taking into account state-of-the-art, the new technology, introducing also real driving emissions testing. So we are moving again now forward. This still needs to be ticked off, you know, bureaucratically, I think, in the Council. But at least now we have clarity as an industry and can move forward also on passenger car side to cut, you know, this discrepancy which existed. I think what the whole story for us has showcased or demonstrated is how challenging it is for regulation to follow innovation. We are living on a continent where, you know, the regulator tries to regulate everything. Okay? Now, having said that, regulation is needed. We are not dismissing that because it creates a level playing field. But of course, in a sector which is changing all the time, it's very difficult for regulation to keep track of innovations. Yeah? And so I think this whole discussion is also asking that question: how in the future are we going to move forward? You know, are you leave flexibility to move forward, or are you going to, if you start with having a very rigid policy, rigid legislation, you need to be aware that by the time that legislation is adopted, perhaps innovation has bypassed already the regulation. So that's one of the big insights for us, and I know that policymakers, Commission, Parliament, Council are looking into that question. Okay. The second big insight from this is, what we've seen in passenger cars, is that Europe has not had a very coherent policy when it comes to climate change on the one hand, which is about CO2 emissions, and air quality, which was NOx and PMs on the other side. The focus in Europe for passenger cars at least was always on CO2 emissions, get CO2 emissions down. Member states have encouraged technology which drives fuel efficiency and cuts CO2 emissions by introducing tax incentives. 17 of the 25 member states in Europe have tax incentives favoring diesel. Yeah. So the whole market has been moving into that direction, also because of policy indication. Now we get into the discussion, okay, shouldn't we have more, you know, balance between air quality and climate change? Yeah? This is going to be obviously another element in the discussion when we're going to have the discussion on decarbonization of transport, which the Commission is initiating halfway this year.
We had one question here and then over there, so just yourself and yourself.
Thank you. Bernard Sweeney from Free Transport in Ireland. Martin, just two questions. One is, we're experiencing an all-time low in fuel prices. Is there a danger that operators will take their focus off fuel economy and put it towards somewhere else in the operation? And my second question is, city authorities like London and Boris Johnson, the city mayor, is changing the way that trucks are being designed to meet certain regulations, such as introducing like blind spot with extra exposure for the driver to see pedestrians and cyclists and other vulnerable road users. Is that a concern for you because of the fact that you have legislators outside of the European Union, which you work very closely with through your body, which you have city authorities now dictating what they require? I'm not talking about emissions because they have their own emission levels as well. I'm just talking about the general design of a truck, which will bring more expense to you and your design team and production.
Thank you for the two questions. I think two very good questions on exactly this that we have also tried to transmit, and it's good to continue that dialogue. On the fuel prices, I think it was fair that what was discussed also on the taxation issue already in Europe, and also the fact, even if we should have a lower taxation level as we see in the US, for example, I mean, I'm representing in that case a group that also have good knowledge about North America, but also other colleagues within ACEA has. What we see, I mean, with operating margin for the transports today is very, I mean, pressed. It means that every cent counts actually. So I mean, when it comes to CO2, and not at least for long haulage, but also for city distribution, etc., it is such a big, it will continue to be, even if it's 20% of the total, or I mean, it is 15% of the total, which should be, I mean, more or less half the price, but with the tax levels we have, and that's not foreseeable anyhow. It should still be such a big share of the price. So I mean, any percentage point you can gain on fuel, you will not miss. Then again, you can always argue, why do we not, and I think it was a good comment from Arthur, I mean, on why don't we see the low-hanging, but some of the low-hanging fruits not coming through, like driver training, for example. Why it's not obvious for everyone to do it, and also with the frequency. I can tell you, we are also, as in our commercial offering, a little bit frustrated from time to time, I think, in the industry. Why don't we see that? So here again is, I mean, moving from a more hardware, manufacturing-based industry, it will be much more about solutions, actually. The whole package, I mean, software, hardware, man-machine interfaces, training packages. And again, the main driver here is really, I mean, efficiency, and the good part, efficiency, will also drive CO2. So I think it will continue to be extremely important. I'm not worried one day that every customer will meet the first or the second or the third of the agenda will be the fuel consumption. It's always like that, and it has always been. Second part of the regulation, yes and no. It depends a little bit on the visibility. Of course, we would like to prefer, as I said, when we have the emission legislations, to have, I mean, as much possible, if it was possible, global frameworks and global legislations, because that has been successful also for the European manufacturers and transport solution providers, and that to export. And as I said, it costs considerable amount of research and development resources with all these specific solutions. At the same time, it is also interesting in some cases to see what you can do a little bit less complex scale. I mean, London, there are a number of cities also, I mean, where product development also in a way together with customers and also through policymakers takes place. So I'm very, I mean, normally I should say that's not the best way to go, but in some cases it could be interesting anyhow. So, but our main task, of course, is to be as proactive as possible so we can take into account the different varieties. And that is again showing the variety of what the truck is used for. It is completely different when you are in a dense city environment like London, regarding security, regarding noise, regarding, I mean, how many kilometers should you be able to run? How about the opportunity to build up an infrastructure of fuels, for example, also for renewable, because you can have a fleet. So again, and there are also specifications. So I guess something we have to live with.
Hi, Yeah, Simon Robson from N0. I have a few questions. First, just following up, you mentioned the compromise agreement which reached work about the conformity factors, and the Commission mentioned that they will be doing everything they can to bring down the conformity factor test to 1 by 2023. So I was just wondering if that's something that you welcome or need feel you can meet. Second, I was interested, I saw you speak yesterday at the conference for the energy intensive industries, and you said that the EU is now the least competitive region in the world for the auto sector. So in reference to this conversation about regulation, and today there was a lot of antipathy towards that, do you also feel that some of this, perhaps the steel sector was saying that you feel over-regulated and that's really hurting your competitiveness? And my final question was CO2.
Sorry, hang on. Can you please complete, but repeat your first question because we didn't hear it from you.
Finals on CO2 car targets, which I understand that people are probably getting at the moment. I understand the industry is pushing for them. It was going to be 2025, the new targets. I understand the industry is pushing for them to go back to 2030. So it's just specifically what you would like, what would be an appropriate new target for CO2 standards for us.
Okay. But that's for passenger cars, right? That's right. No, okay, well, let me take that one first of all. As you heard also this morning in the discussion on commercial vehicles, and that's in fact the same for passenger cars and light-duty commercial vehicles, lead times in the industry are very long. Okay? There's a lot of innovation capability, but the longer we know in advance what the targets are, the easier it is to plan for innovation. So when it comes to new targets, we know there is this, frankly, there is no decision yet taken, okay, on whether it's going to be 25 or 2030 target, okay. The only thing which we have said till now in the discussions with the Commission is, first of all, when you set targets, make sure they are set long time in advance so that we can plan our innovation and then the new products accordingly. Okay? Because at the end of the day, new targets will not go up, they will go down. So that means more innovation required, new powertrains, and so on. And okay, there's a lot which already has been done, but the more you want to move downwards, the more efforts are required, and that requires a longer planning cycle. We talk 2030 in some of our discussions because we followed there the logic of the Commission. And what I mean by that is, last year the Commission adopted a package on climate change and on energy renewables with clear targets which were set for 2030. And so we just were looking at that framework, which is a general framework not only for us but for all the industries, of course. So we were trying to look forward into the package which was announced last year to see how we would fit into there. And that's why we currently, in some of our reflections, are talking 2030. At the end of the day, it's the institutions, the Commission, who decides what the targets are. This leads to another point, that we need to avoid a situation, and Europe is very strong in that. They set targets all the time, left and right, for this and that, sometimes conflicting targets. You see a proliferation of target setting in Europe, and we need to just make sure, there's nothing wrong with setting targets, but we need to make sure there is consistency. And we sometimes, by setting all these targets, they create an incredible complexity for the industry. And when you say complexity, and then we come to the other point, complexity means extra cost, because you need to comply with these rules. It requires systems to be set up to ensure compliance, and that's all extra cost. Okay? And there, if you compare with compliance cost of regulation in Europe versus other places in the world, we seem to be becoming, not best in class, but worst in class worldwide. We have the tendency in Europe to add more regulation, to add more complexity, Probably also due to the fact that it's so difficult to find a good compromise between the 28 member states, so it's always very complex what comes out, okay? Even if the intentions initially were the best ones. But what comes out of it is a monster regulation or legislation, adding a lot of complexity for the industry to comply with. And that, when we indeed asked as ACEA to FTI Consulting, which is a consultancy in London, to make some calculations comparing, what is the situation in other parts of the world, that's where they came to the conclusion that in the period 2007-2012, frankly, our industry has seen an increase of cost, which has, of course, had an impact on the profitability of the industry because of, regulation. And indeed, in 2007, Europe was the most profitable region for automotive. 2007, 2012. Now we ask FTI to make now some calculations what it means for the last years. But if you look at 2012, we were the least profitable region in the world. And so again, that is not to argue, and we heard this morning the Commission saying facts and figures. We try to kind of bring these facts and figures to the table in order to allow for informed decision making. It's, at the end of the day, it is not meant to say we are against regulation or we are against targets, not at all. We just want to make sure that when the legislator, at the end of the day, makes decisions on regulating the industry, that they do it taking into account the implications it has. Because sometimes we hear conflicting messages, they want this, but they also want that and that. And all this, when you talk about cost, profitability has also an impact on jobs for the industry.
When it comes, just to on that question on energy, I mean, it depends on what angle you're coming from, of course. But I think it's important to state, just to add on what Erik said, I think that the initiative of the Dutch presidency is good. I mean, we need to make sure that we are driving things in the right direction. We know that transport demand will continue to go up. And that is a driving factor, not only for Europe but for the world. We know that it must be done in a considerably more sustainable way. We say that we are taking steps, clear steps, or inviting other stakeholders that also accept that dialogue to say, okay, we need also to have some sort of mindset to say, we accept that we need to cooperate in order to achieve this. And I think that you can actually reason economic, environment, social, safety, also together with job creation. The problem in the long run otherwise, of course, is that we'll say, okay, and it's not a threat, it's just a reality, because you will say, okay, then you will actually maybe find your network somewhere else, etc. And that should be a pity. I think we have been driving, when it comes to the commercial vehicle side, an agenda of continuous and sustainable development. In some areas we have leapfrogged. In some areas, yes, we can have done better, but I think we have opened up for a discussion where we can actually have a transparent dialogue. Are we moving quick enough, so to speak? And I think that's fine.
I'll take Barbara, your question.
Barbara is from Reuters. I wanted to just take out the conversation yesterday on China and market economy status. And I got the feeling that China is actually a good thing for the industry, and cheap steel too is potentially a good thing. So I wondered what you thought of the steel industry, and maybe this is all really now than you did yesterday. It's good. Do you think the market economy status would actually be desirable for China? And just back to the pens, I know you spoke about it, but I don't fully understand why it took so long for it to come to the car sector when it was being used in trucks for quite a considerable time.
Okay. Let me first start with answering the last question. Okay, that's at the end of the, again, that's where I say the issue of regulation running behind innovation. This testing method, it was subject of regulation. Indeed, the discussions which the Commission has initiated to update this testing method have taken too long. And we recognize that, we agree with that assessment or that observation. We've been asking for this already for some time. There have been discussions which went on, and frankly you could say, thanks to the unfortunate Volkswagen scandal, things have accelerated. Second, on China, clearly, it's not up to our sector, who are we, to say what status China should have. This is a political decision, and as we heard yesterday in the conference, is organized by the Commission. The Commission is looking at this from different angles. We, as an industry, when it comes to steel as well as other parts, for us the key criteria are cost and quality. Okay? So as long as we can have access to products, to parts, to materials which are being offered to OEMs at high quality and at a reasonable cost, that's good for OEMs. That's good for our customers, because at the end of the day, I mean, all this contributes to the total cost picture of the product which is sold to the customer. As we already said, we OEMs will always look at. Our president will be in a better position to comment on this, but to look at the most cost-effective solutions. So on the one hand, I think this whole debate leads obviously to discussions about, how can the steel industry in Europe continue to operate producing products of high quality, but also at competitive cost, the competitive price. Clearly, they are important to us, they are an important supplier to our industry, and we want to continue, of course, working very closely in partnership with that sector. Also for the future, because together we can come up with new products, new innovations as well.
Absolutely. No, I think it's fine. Just to add on that, of course, we're also working with our different value chains when it comes to the environmental aspects and other parts as a base for quality and competitive cost. Are we perfect? No, but are we doing things in that? Yes.
I'm afraid Mr. Leuven has an error. You can take one more question? A quick
Yeah, I think because you have been trying it since we started.
You have talked about strengthening market forces through better customer information about fuel economy. How could that translate in terms of deliverables? What can we look forward to? What would be the ideal transparent CO2 or fuel economy information?
No, but what we have said, I mean, it's again that you need to have a reliable and a large input of data, because as we said again, it is a big variation of different things, and the whole idea about the vector tool is of course that you, by having from numerous different applications, geographies, but also brands and makes, can have reliable input. So from the output you can actually, as the consumer or the customer, have an opportunity actually to transparently look at what will give the best abatement for me as a customer when it comes to different factors, and not at least CO2. So that is what we're looking forward to, and we think this is a very important starting point. It seems that we not only we should obviously is decided and work with from the Commission, but that we have found a way that we are bringing, so to speak, very competitive sensitive data in a system where we're actually not also abusing the fact that we need to be competitive and to, so to speak, respect the competitive regulations, of course.
Okay. I'm afraid Mr. Lundstedt does have an airplane to catch.
Yeah.
Eric has a meeting to attend right now, so we'll have to cut it here.